And we have question 4 and probably 5. We'll see how that goes. If someone could read it. Oh, so.
Are we reading question 4 or question 5?
You were muted, Madeline. Oh.
Yeah, that switch didn't work. Question 4, we just barely touched on, I believe, last time. So let's start there.
Question 4. What is the invisible or secret ground of hope? Answer. That cannot be discerned, which is secret and invisible. But yet there is sometimes a hope in the heart when it is not perceived, which is maintained and fed by the invisible life, which is hid there. I don't have much to comment about that, except I love it. I just love it. We don't have to know anything about the invisible or secret ground of hope, but if we're able to experience hope, who cares? The Lord is good. The Lord is loving us by allowing us to feel hope.
I do understand and by experience believe that the Lord can do much in me that I'm unaware of. I just wonder if there's a not so secret ground of hope too for working in me towards that. I'm curious about that is, and maybe I'm missing the other questions since I haven't been for many times. Are they all about hope?
Yes, I just pulled up question 3. I think it should be visible on your screen because it's just, yeah, that one was a discussion of something more apparent to us in contrast to this, although they don't seem all that contrasting to me.
Oh, it does say when it is not perceived. There is sometimes a hope in the heart when it is not perceived, which is maintained and fed by the invisible life which is hid there. So could then it mean if I perceive him, that basically we're supposed to have hope whether we perceive it or not, which is probably true.
Yeah, it seems like it's a call to trust that as somebody recent, I heard this phrase, the river under the river.
Yes.
Yeah. And that upwelling of nutrients that is available. Yeah, I can't say much directly. I have almost a body memory of some times in the past when there has been that little tug in the heart that was pulling me towards God, but unacknowledged. I can't even really. I could probably even talk about when those times were, but it was like there was so much worldliness on top of it. It was mostly imperceptible, just the slightest, maybe more like a desire. Certainly a drawing toward, or a feeling of not being entirely abandoned might be a way to say it.
I think you feel it more in those times of distress, or even times of absence that you feel. And then there's always the hope that all things will work for good. And it becomes a matter of endurance, patience, keeping the faith. And so with no hope, that kind of falls apart at the slightest bump in the road.
Is there more to say about this one, or shall we go to number 5?
It's written beautifully. It's question 5. The answer is.
I'm okay to go on to number 5.
Would you like to read it, Constance?
Sure. What is the nature and proper effects of hope? It stays the mind, even in the midst of storms and tempests, that they do not overturn, overwhelm, and sink the soul. It keeps at the head above the many waters and keeps the heart from utterly fainting. It preserves life in the many famines and straight-edged sieges of the enemy. Hope of relief keeps from yielding to the enemy and preserves from distrusting the Lord. Distrust cannot enter and prevail where hope abides. Hope adds strength to the soul in its pursuit of all that is good, and in its flying from and eschewing all that is evil, and is the succor of faith in the needful hour. Yea, how often would the faith be given up and foiled, were it not for the hope which relieves it?
Please forgive me for being so chatty this evening, but I'm coming out of a period where my hope was severely strained. My son, who suffers from mental illness, attacked me the other night and hurt my feelings. Well, that's nothing new, but he said, don't even talk to me or write to me if you're not going to come back to New York and evict that other man in my mother's life and come back and protect your family. Well, I said, okay, it hurts, but I'm not going to let myself be bullied. And I understand why he's so hurt, because he sent me a pair of shoes as a gift that I didn't want. And I told him, no, please don't send me gifts. Use that money to pay down your debts. So I returned them, and he was, of course, hurt by that. And then his sister, hearing about his cruel treatment of me, scolded him. And maybe that's what did the trick. He wrote back and said, sorry, Dad, and is still maintaining a civil relationship with me. And I was also trying to finish writing a paper to present at the Friends Association for Higher Education called "A Faith That Ignores Sin is Useless to Sinners." I wrote one edition of it, and it just felt terrible. It was not well written. And so I rewrote it. But that took enormous effort, and I went through a lot of feelings of failure. And I just finished it at 4:08 this afternoon. That's 6:08 a.m. Queensland time. So it's very recent. And it feels okay. And I suspect that it is altogether acceptable to the Lord. And so I can put it aside and drive to Malone University on the 3rd of 6th month and hand it out outside the door, because I don't intend to go in. And that's how I understand my assignment. I will be able to do it, and I'm not defeated. Although I've been feeling very defeated in the past day or two. And I just feel like saying hallelujah. And hope has added strength to my soul in its pursuit of all that is good. So that's all I had to say about it. I'm just very deeply relieved and grateful.
When this was being read, the sentence that stood out for me, jumped out at me, was this one, where it says that hope is the succorer of faith. So maybe a couple sessions ago, Tom was asking about what is the relationship between faith and hope, that they just seem so intricately tied together, that he couldn't imagine one without the other. Excuse me, Tom, if I'm not getting it, your idea exactly right, but that's how I'm recalling it. And I think that this paragraph gives an answer to that. Faith is a great good. It's a positive substance. But and sometimes the cause of our faith is very apparent to us. We feel the presence of Christ within. And that's a great positive substance. But not always. We don't always feel the presence of Christ, that being within us. And what faith or what hope is that it is the great succorer of faith, in that we continue to have that sense of peace that comes with faith, even though that immediate presence isn't apparent at a particular time. Because of hope, we have a kind of what Penington says, as our minds are stayed or are at peace, even in the midst of storms and tempests, because of hope, because we know that that presence will always be with us, even though it's not apparent at times. So hope is what sustains us in those times when faith is not manifest. It too is a positive substance. And what I also noticed in this paragraph is that the evil is identified in terms of a lack. It's referred to as famines and sieges of the enemy, an absence of the goodness. But if the goodness of hope and certainly of faith are present, then we are sustained and not overrun by the enemy. Hope adds strength to the soul in its pursuit of all that is good. Faith is when we don't have to struggle or exert strength, because Christ is present and is that strength within us. But when that presence is not known, not felt, then hope is there to give us strength that we can exercise in our souls towards that which is good. If Christ is king, hope is like a lieutenant or someone who assists.
I haven't read ahead, but I hope he addresses what robs us of hope and what restores it, because I was in worship this morning with somebody who was clearly very hopeless, does not trust the Lord, as is written in this paragraph. It is really in despair over the state of the world. And I could see she was almost invested in those beliefs. She's not always like this.
I think that needs to be a distinction made between speculation and hope. Hope is a quality that naturally occurs within us when we have known that visitation of Christ. Thereafter, there's faith and there's hope, because we know that Christ is real. And if he's not apparent to us, it's temporary, it's time. But I believe in scriptures there's a line that says he will never leave us. Can't remember where it is. But that's a certainty. And with that certainty, we can't be in despair. If Christ has not been known, if that visitation has not occurred, is of a different nature. It's speculative. It's a quality of our own minds rather than a firm conviction based on experience. And if it's something from our own minds, it's weak, it's easily tumbled, it's easily lost. If faith has been there, if Christ has made his visitation, faith can't be lost. And hope can't be lost either. But I think in our own attribution of meaning to these words of religion, religious words, we identify hope as being a speculation, a product of the mind. And it's something else. It's a quality of experience. one's speculations can be upended by looking at the world. You say, I got that wrong. I shouldn't have thought that. The reality has proved me wrong. But hope is something that's inward. You look inward. And that's where it's from. It's not by looking outward.
I think there are obstacles to, even after the visitation, as he says, to accepting the hope that he gives us. And I think kind of what's through the question 4 and this one too, is that we don't have to understand things. We don't have to understand why the world is the way the world is, and yet we try to sometimes. But I think that can get in the way, that trying to understand why can get in the way of simply experiencing that inward hope that he does give us. And so to experience it, to know it, we don't have to understand it. I mean, there's lots of things that I can experience and know and not understand, like making a cell phone call. So I think sometimes our need to know or understand can get in the way of experiencing the light of Christ, the presence of Christ, and the hope that he naturally brings.
I hope that we are noticing David Johnson's contributions in the chat.
I didn't scroll up far enough to see the first one was from George Fox. Yep.
I put a little extract from Fox's journal early in the journal, which is 1647, so he's quite young, he's 23. And it's a pretty similar experience in a way that when he was going through his despairing times, he felt anchored by Christ as the bishop, which enabled him to keep his head. And I'm also reminded of, there's a line somewhere in Penington where he says there are two faiths, a faith born of man and a faith born of God, which I think is some of what Patricia was opening up. And they're utterly different, because the faith born of man is easily modified by other people's arguments or different doctrines. the hope gets questioned. We find question there within us. But the one that comes from the invisible or secret ground in the heart, which is instilled by Christ, it's unchangeable. It may go away a little bit, but when it's needed, Christ just tops it up, just draws it, enlightens it, just makes us. I always think that what the light does of Christ is sort of, it makes us aware of something. We don't often see a huge light, but light actually makes us aware of that hope, or makes us aware of the presence, or makes us aware of I've sometimes thought in this, the imagery, storms and tempests. And Fox says raging waves, foul weather, tempests. And I was sort of often wondered, so what are those allegorical words actually talking about? Well, I can understand the raging waves come from afar, they're like the stuff which just impinges on us and has the tendency to upset us, upset our stability, mental and spiritual stability, the foul weather. Well, I think there's some pretty foul tempers arise sometimes in me and in other people. The tempests, the sort of emotional storms, and the temptations of being tempted by something that's out of the way, off the narrow path. And experiencing these, you might feel, oh, we're all lost, but underneath there's a hope. The hope is actually always there, I think, in the deep part of the heart. It's just that Christ makes us aware of it. He says, look, it's here. I put it there in the bottom of your heart. You don't always notice it, but you need to be aware of it. I'll just show it to you. Which is a very succouring and stabilizing and calming work of Christ. I guess the early Christians understood it too, otherwise it wouldn't have been written in the Hebrews. And I read somewhere that the symbol of the anchor is often carved into the walls of the catacombs, along with the fish. So they actually experienced this too, the early Christians. It was very much part of their experience and their reliance upon Jesus. And it's here for us now, revisited, come to teach us ourselves. How marvellous.
Sorry, Eileen had to leave early. I had hoped to hear from her. Is there more on this one, or maybe we're ready for 6? Or is there a 6? I don't even know. Yeah, we're on to love.
Oh, I love this one. Is this the long version?
Yes, so.
'Cause I've read that several times. It's beautiful.
Is there someone who would volunteer to read?
Question 1. What is love? Answer. What shall I say of it? Or how shall I in words express its nature? It is the sweetness of life. It is the sweet, tender, melting nature of God, flowing up through his seed of life into the creature, and of all things making the creature most like unto himself, both in nature and operation. It fulfills the law, it fulfills the gospel. It wraps up all in one and brings forth all in the oneness. It excludes all evil out of the heart. It perfects all good in the heart. A touch of love doth this in measure. Perfect love doth this in fullness. But how can I proceed to speak of it? Oh, that the souls of all that fear and wait on the Lord might feel its nature fully. And then would they not fail of its sweet overcoming operations, both towards one another and towards enemies. The great healing, the great conquest, the great salvation is reserved for the full manifestation of the love of God. His judgments, his cuttings, his hewings by the word of his mouth are but to prepare for, but not to do, the great work of raising up the sweet building of his life, which is to be done in love and in peace, and by the power thereof. And this my soul waits and cries after, even the full springing up of eternal love in my heart, and in the swallowing of me wholly into it, and the bringing of my soul wholly forth in it, that the life of God in its own perfect sweetness may fully run forth through this vessel, and not be at all tinctured by the vessel, but perfectly tincture and change the vessel into its own nature. And then shall no fault be found in my soul before the Lord, but the spotless life be fully enjoyed by me, and become a perfectly pleasant sacrifice to my God. Oh, how sweet is love! How pleasant is its nature! How takingly doth it behave itself in every condition, upon every occasion, to every person, and about everything! How tenderly, how readily doth it help and serve the meanest! How patiently, how meekly doth it bear all things, either from God or man! How unexpectedly soever they come, or how hard soever they seem! How doth it believe? How doth it hope? How doth it excuse? How doth it cover even that which seemeth not to be excusable, and not fit to be covered? How kind is it even in its interpretations and charges concerning miscarriages! It never overchargeth, it never grates upon the spirit of him whom it reprehends. It never hardens, It never provokes, but carrieth a meltingness and power of conviction with it. This is the nature of God. This, in the vessels capacitated to receive and bring it forth in its glory. The power of enmity is not able to stand against, but falls before and is overcome by.
This is what's available to us. Its manifestations inside us and outside are talked about. It's us who turn away. Sin can get in the way, can lessen it. Not from Christ, I don't believe, but I don't think he works that way. But because sin is not good for us, and he knows that. I don't think his love, grows and lessens because of our behavior, our sin. It's just that in sin, whether it be of our own making or sin committed against us by others that can break us, those things can be healed if we open to this love, and who would not, but and yet
So from 1 Peter 2:5, ye also as lively stones are built up a spiritual house, an holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God by Jesus Christ.
That little verse I offered in the chat, just then, that Marilyn has read, is because the words in Penington here, which I understand, his judgment, his cuttings, his hewings by the word of his mouth, are but to prepare for. And I can remember having a reasonably detailed explanation inwardly to me once, and a showing to me of what needed to be judged, what needed to be cut away, and what needed to be hewn off, so that, well, for me, but maybe for each of us, it's in our natural shape. We're not ready We don't fit into building this building of the church. But once we've been his cuttings, you see, the gardener, that sort of Christ does the sort of cutting away of the stuff which is impeding us and hews off sometimes. It's not just a simple cutting, it's actually big chunks are knocked off to level the shape or to make it fit with the other people who've also been shaped and fitted, so we all fit together into a stable wall of the house of God, the church. And we're lively stones, as he says, Peter. A lot of life in us. We're not solid. We're solid, but not just to sit there and do nothing. Because the allegory can only go so far. We have to be reshaped to fit into the building of this church. So those words of Penington's judge, his judgment, his cuttings, his hewings by the word of his mouth. I have some experience of. As of course did Peter himself. The transformation of Peter was one of the extraordinary miracles told to us in the New Covenant writings. From an extremely impetuous young person to a much more compliant individual, so that he could do the work that he was being called to do. I love the sense of Penington's writings and the expression of what love does to us. And it's with that love that we are judged and cut and hewn to be useful.
And don't forget healed. and don't forget when things are spiritually exercised as they are, things that don't serve us or him. At least in my experience, what you can't stay empty. And what gets filled with more with this love of his, but also my love of him, which is, I think, as much a part of the ability to resist the enemy, to use that word, as the other. It's both and, but it's all his doing.
I appreciate our time together, but it does seem to be at an end. So glad everyone could come this evening. Our next meeting will be the 29th.
I so appreciate how each of you expresses your insights. It's very sweet, and today in particular. Thank you all.
Thank you. Well, this is the end of the time, but it's not the end of the working of the reading. This will go on a little while. Bye for now.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.